more than 100 unique styles of beer, each with their own set of ingredients, process, guidelines, history, and experience. If you're a beer lover, an industry leader, or somewhere in between, a better knowledge of beer style will improve your life and your work.
Welcome to A Sense of Beer Style, essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. I'm Julia Herz.
And I'm Jeremy Storton.
We're advanced Cicerones, beer judges, home brewers, and we're excited to guide you through the vast and wonderful world of beer styles. Well, welcome everyone to another amazing showcast, stylecast of Sense of Beer Style. Hello, Jeremy, and we are diving in. Hello. And we are diving in and excited to have you with us, whether you have one in your glass in hand or not, but we always encourage that. English IPA is part of the 2021 Beer Judge Certification Program guidelines. Jeremy has a coveted example, and so he'll entice you through it if you're watching us. And if not, don't worry, and you're listening. We're going to intimately describe this, and you are going to be changed and transformed. As much as, frankly, this style has been changed and transformed. And that's probably a good kind of setup for the big picture, some of the relevance of English IPA in our modern beer culture, as well as its history and evolving nature. You got a lot of controversy over the, story and defining of this style. You've got CAMRA, which is a governing organization in the UK that represents brewers' interests, really weighing in on so-called English IPAs and talking about the strengths. So CAMRA literally even going on the record and documented in the Beer Judge Certification Program guidelines, so-called IPAs with strengths of around 3.5% are not true to style. That makes sense based on when we go over the vital statistics for how this style is. But you've got commercial brewers that can say anything. This is not governed in certain ways. And they've even quoted an English historian, Martin Cornell, has commented that these beers are not really distinguishable from an ordinary bitter. I think that's interesting because if we tasted them side by side, we'd probably be able to prove that they are. So it's a style that's got a lot of history from England, and these were originally heavily hopped beers shipped over to India. They were contained in casks, but the casks were very well used, so you don't have any essence of tannins or polyphenols from those casks. And modern versions today really started with the 1830 version that really, I think, got well known from the George Hogston Brewery that I personally not had, but the Bow Brewery helped establish this style, although the guidelines are important, point out that they didn't create it. And then the beer was, in the Hogston era in the 1830s, reformulated. One thing that's always held steady, even into circa 2023, is that the water profile of this style will come up when Jeremy and I talk a lot about it. And you'll hear about Burton-on-Trent, which is an area in England and the UK, sulfite-rich hard water. And I think that is truly a big attribute. So, Jeremy, anything you want to add in the big picture setup, and please kind of dovetail into the classic ingredients for English IPA.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that intro, Julia. This is one of probably this is the most storied beer style. There's a lot of myth, there's a lot of fairy tale, and it's all a really fun story to tell. Most of it's probably true or true-ish. During those days, were there British troops in India? Yes. Were they hot and thirsty? Most likely. Did they want beer from the homeland? You betcha. So in order to get beer to travel that far and remain good and drinkable and not bad and sour and gross, you had to add more hops. You had to up the alcohol for it to preserve for that long trip. Is that true? Yes. We see that in other styles that have the export label to it. They're a little bit stronger because they need to travel. And did those troops come back home and say, I want that beer style that I had when I was abroad? Maybe. But nonetheless, that's the story that has come out. Was this the only beer shipped to India? No, it was not the only beer shipped to India? Was it the only brewery? Was the Bow Brewery from George Hodgson? Was that the only one shipping stuff? No, but there was a lot of elbowing, political and business elbowing. They were on the tame, so it made it a lot easier for them to distribute, and they made sure that they had competitive advantage. And that's a different story for a different podcast. So let's get to the essence of what IPA is. You brought this up, Julie. I just want to lay this to rest. In order to get this beer to ship intact to India, it had to be hoppier and it had to be stronger. So when we have an IPA that's 2 or 3%, that's like saying it's a sessionable strong ale. What is that? That's an oxymoron. It's either strong or it's sessionable, but it can't be both at the same time. So that's where we need to be clear on what it is we're talking about. IPAs tend to be on the stronger side, stronger is being relative, but we'll get to that in a little bit when we get to vital stats. But that's the background behind all that stuff. The ingredients that will go into these traditional styles, keep in mind, when we talk about this BJCP style, we're really talking about the cask ale version and less the bottled versions. And that's really what the style was kind of written around. So keep it with a grain of salt. But these beers are kind of simple. You've got pale ale malt. You have English hops that are going into it, especially as finishing hops to get that hoppy flavor as well as the bitterness. You can even have some refined sugar in there to dry out that body. And you're going to use a very attenuative British yeast, along with some of those British yeast. If you got a touch of diacetyl in there, it's not the biggest sin that one could imagine. But you mentioned this: the Burton-on-Trent, the Burtonized water, higher in sulfate, that really brings the hops, the hop flavor and the hop bitterness into a clear, sharper focus, using my camera analogy when we're talking about flavors. And so that is the impact. But pretty simple recipe for these beers is just in how you use it. So those are the ingredients you can expect in a typical British style IPA. I'm going to pour my glass and I'm going to ask you to talk about the appearance.
And while Jeremy is doing that, we're going to pay attention on appearance to color, because this is one of those styles that has such a broad range. The color ranges for this can be golden to deep amber, anywhere from 6 to 14 SRM. So it could be deceiving if you see one of these. I also want to add, if you're studying the style guidelines from BJCP at least, Pale Commonwealth beers is the category this has been put in, and it ties to the history. So in appearance, which I'll get to in a moment, or appearance aside, Pale Commonwealth beers are listed in the style guidelines different than the English bitters. And what they get at is pale, moderately strong, hop-forward bitter ales from countries within the former British Empire. That's important to note because these beers can be light in color. That's why I bring it up during appearance. So color ranges, as I said, is golden to deep amber. Most are fairly pale. I'm seeing that as deep amber, right? Not at all going to brown or anything, or it's like a light copper, little rust colored, beautiful colored beer.
Yeah, perfect.
And we want it to be clear, although unfiltered, dry hopped versions can be a bit hazy. That is classic, hop haze and dry hopping influence. That'd be okay. And then that collar of foam that Jeremy is able to showcase, or you would see yourself if you're just listening and pour one in your glass, it should be a medium-sized, very persistent collar of foam. And that off-white color will often be influenced by some specialty malt. Not just the pale base malt that's used as the main fermentable. So very pretty beer. And now, how does it smell?
Well, this particular beer that I got, I've got the beer and the glass from this incredible brewery in Bend, Oregon. It's Porter Brewing, but they specialize in cask only British style ales. And I've spoken at length with the brewer, and he is dedicated to the craft to say the least. And please forgive my plug of that incredible brewery, but I'm not ashamed. If you're in Bend, that's probably one of the first breweries I'm going to take you to is this cask ale. That being said, finding a true from Britain British IPA is a little bit more challenging. Maybe if you find a big box store, you might have a chance of getting something from like Samuel Smith or something like that. But they're not that common in the U.S. We like our U.S. IPAs, and they're very different. This one, as far as the aroma is concerned, you get this kind of a pale, light bready. It's very light biscuity note, and it's very medium low to even medium is typical of this style. This one is really showcasing much more a caramel in that malt profile. With the hops, however, you can get a medium to medium high hop aroma. That can be floral, could be a little bit spicy. I typically, if it's a British hops, I'm typically looking for green tea. It could have a little essence of orange. It could be very like a wet soil type of earthiness to it. This particular sample is just screaming caramel, and I love it. But I would expect a little bit more hops out of a true style. Through these, because of the maltiness and that firm malt backbone, which is different from an American IPA, you can have this low to medium fruitiness or fruity esters that come through. That can be like apple or like light raisin, and that's just wonderful. But because of the water, we talked about the higher sulfate. If they're using harder water like that, it's okay to get a little bit of sulfur through there. Preferably, it's not like that boiled rotten egg type of sulfur, but if it's a little bit of like a struck matchstick, a sulfur dioxide, if that's just real low, then that is perfectly okay. But that's what you can expect out of the aroma. Let's talk about the flavor.
Well done, friend. I am very intrigued. And again, if you come across this English IPA example, and Jeremy's talking about Porter Brewing Company in the US, but classic examples from the country of origin in England are truly to be regarded, and secure them, taste them. And
Yes.
So when you taste, you're going to notice a lot of the characteristics that Jeremy talked about. And so we will lead with, and this is a indicative aspect of all India Pale Ales or IPAs, but the English IPA has centric to hop flavor and bitterness, and the hop flavor is medium to high. So you've got some assertive hop bitterness in there. The IBUs are 40 to 60 international bitterness units. That's not aggressive, but I like the word assertive there. And then the hop flavor is what maybe Jeremy's getting from those English style hops, often floral, herbal, spicy, peppery. You can get some citrus or orange or marmalade notes from those hops. Mm-hmm. And then it's funny that when you taste this, it is a beer style, if you're going to style guidelines, that merits and almost demands the beer to be hop centric first, and then the malt flavor as a supporting kind of the backup singer to the band, lead singer of the hops. So malt flavor should be medium, low to medium, which is, I think, reasonable. And medium is going to make it very pronounced. But you're looking for those beautiful English pale malt notes. And these are the ones of romance novels that really make me want to write books on this style. And you've got, toast and bready biscuit and toffee and caramel. And you don't want these anything but nuanced, anything but delicate, anything but poetic and reserved enough to be noticed, but not a obnoxious presence of them. Then you've got the essence of the finish. And in talking about flavor, you remember that I've been taught by Randy Mosier that tasting beer is a movie. It's not one moment in time. It's an event. So as Jeremy takes a sip, and I'm talking 3-5 seconds in, there's a beginning taste, there's a mid taste, and there's an aftertaste. So no matter what residual sugar Jeremy's going to try with a pretty high final gravity of 1010 to 1015, you want to pay attention to the fact that the style guidelines emphasize that this beer should finish medium dry to very dry. And what's going to help that is that high sulfate, hard water profile from Burton-on-Trent. And so Jeremy definitely is pointing out in his aroma things that only can be noticed by smell, and I am pointing out what you perceive by the palate in taste. And so the balance is towards the hops, and then the malt is a supporting star. You've got essence of sulfate, hard water usage, which helps dry out the finish in the aftertaste of that beer. And then you may get an essence of ethanol, and some, I'm not seeing the style guidelines here allow for diacetyl, Jeremy. You mentioned that. That's an off flavor, can be a flavor component that's good or bad from yeast. Depends on what the brewer intended. But I like a little bump of diacetyl. It gives me a little bit of butterscotch or buttery essence, as long as it's not aggressive. And that's...
I don't think diacetyl is technically allowed for the style, but I'm not going to dock any points for just a little touch of butterscotch at the end. And frankly, it's going to be difficult to decipher a touch of butterscotch from toffee or strong caramel. And my comment was, there are greater sins in this world than having a touch of diacetyl in my British IPA.
Absolutely. And that's why I think it's okay to mention, as you did, and this is all style guideline study, but it's also then brand or homebrew study. And if you like it in the flavor and it enhances the flavor, then have at it. And diacetyl can enhance the mouthfeel as well as the actual essence of flavor. So speaking of mouthfeel, Jeremy, what is for English IPAs the mouthfeel?
For English IPA, what I'm looking for in a kind of a bullseye of the style and not something close is I want it to be smooth. Honestly, I don't know any beer style at all, period, that allows it to be harsh. If it's harsh, it's usually aged or poorly brewed to begin with. We're talking about IPAs. There's a lot of hop bitterness that can kind of grip you on both sides of the back of your tongue. And grippy is a term I've heard other extremely knowledgeable people use when it comes to this bitterness. It can grip you, but it's not like a rough sandpaper. It's like a really high grit sandpaper, a smooth sandpaper. So it's grippy, not harsh. So I expect these to be smooth. I expect them to have quite a bit of body to them, a medium low up to about medium body, which is a good solid, right in the middle there. I don't expect any astringency out of this. Again, that adds to the harshness, but it's a challenge to decipher astringency, which is that dryness you get from tannins, from hops, from a dry finish. When I think of a dry finish that you talked about, Julia, I think about, like that stuff you can spray on your windshield of your car so that when it rains, the water just sheets off instead of forming droplets. To me, that's like a finish where you have all this water on your palate and then it just sheets off and your palate is clean, ready to go for the next sip. That's how I think about dry versus a sweet finish in that regard. So astringency and finish, they're kind of similar, but they're different. With these beers, I also think about a medium to medium high carbonation. And that's really adding to that medium body as well. And because they're strong by nature, relatively strong by nature, having a little bit of low alcohol warming is okay. If you detect that, it's not a problem. That ought to be there. That's kind of a picture of a typical British IPA according to the guidelines. But that's the mouthfeel. Let's talk about style comparison. This is it gets really fun for me.
It really does. And to do beer studies, you're tasting very similar beer styles the more advanced you get, or brother, sister, cousins kind of in the early studies, and then you really go for your exact match, but subtly different. And so the style guidelines talk about generally more late hops and less fruitiness and caramel than British pale ales and bitters. You're looking at ordinary, best, and strong bitters to really compare this to. I would all the way go up on the other end of the spectrum. And what about, English barley wine, right? That's the up the ladder one rung, and then the British pale ales are below the rung on this. But they're very similar in some of the base ingredients. Then you also talk about, in comparison, less hop intensity and more pronounced malt flavor than typical American IPAs. So if you're going to try an English IPA, have it against some of the British bitters. and then also have it with, I would say, an English barley wine, and then also have it with an American IPA. And I bet you that would be a very mind expanding practice to do for your beer studies, because there's a lot of similarities, but there's also some definite differences.
Yeah, and that's a thing that this is a great stereotype that rings true more often than not. That if you're in the U.S. or anywhere else in the world, and you have a U.S. West Coast IPA that just happens to be a little bit darker, a little bit more malt balanced, chances are that is going to fall into a more of an English IPA category. Because if I were to, side by side, take a generic English IPA and a generic American West Coast IPA, not a hazy, but a traditional American West Coast IPA, the British one is going to be more malt balanced and the American is going to be slanted more toward hops. That's just the way that everything evolved. Back in the day, the brewers, the home brewers, decided that bigger is better in typical American fashion. So we went bigger on hops, and the rest is history.
Well said.
Right. So let's talk about some commercial examples. Now, granted, I lucked out. I found one that's not a perfect commercial example, but it fits the guidelines perfectly because it's a British style pub. But if you had the chance, if you're in England, you'll find them plenty. If you find a big box store, or if you're luck out, you'll find them. But we just talked about if you're looking for a microbrewer or small brewer, craft brewer, if it's more malty, if it's darker, chances are it's going to be on the British side. The commercial examples you can look for are the Fuller's Bengal Lancer IPA, the Meantime London IPA, the Worthington White Shield, the Berkshire Lost Sailor, Marston's Old Empire IPA, in Thornbridge, Jaipur, which is kind of alludes to the India, so India Pale Ale. But those aren't the only ones out there, and you may not find those. I've never seen those in my recent memory, but I found plenty of others that fit the bill. So you kind of have to look at the guidelines and do the best you can to find it. But we've been alluding to the numbers here for quite a bit, so let's talk about the numbers.
Excellent. Let's talk about the numbers. And the easy tip on English IPA that I will tell your mind to follow in remembering the vital statistics in this style is there's a lot of fives, right? The original gravity starts at 1050 and goes to 1070. The final gravity is 1010 to 1015. The ABV is 5 to 7.5% alcohol by volume. That's a lot of fives. And if you can anchor on the original gravity of 1050 to 1070, you're in a good starting point, because you will probably get the rest. Then international bitterness units, I mentioned earlier, 40 to 60. Granted, you want to balance bitterness units with residual sugar, and then that gets you a true essence of the BU to GU ratio. But 40 to 60 has more assertive hops for bitterness, as the style guidelines call for, but not aggressive like American IPAs might be regarded as. And then SRM, or standard reference method for color, is that 6, meaning just dark gold, to 14, which is really getting towards more of a deep dark copper. So these are really grounding statistics that I think are fair to try to have you all remember and study. And I think you should. So study this style. And with that, speaking kind of numbers and the like, what about temperature in serving this, Jeremy, and then glassware?
Yeah, and if it's okay, I did a little bit of research. I'm trying to do better for a global audience. I did look up the EBC on this, as well as the degrees Plato. So for all of you who don't speak SRM or original final gravity, the EBC color, the European Brewery Convention, is typically twice, but we're looking at 12 to 28 here. And the degrees Plato for original gravity can be anywhere from 11.4 to 15.7. We've talked about the difference between gravity, or the correlationship between gravity and Plato. They're interrelated, but I'm going to save that for another time. The final gravity, 3.1 to 4.6. But when you kind of work out the math, if you're thinking about the gravity or the alcohol in degrees Plato, then we're talking right around 8 to 11. And that matches up with the ABV there. I just want to throw that in there because I think it's important for us to speak globalese. So let's talk about glassware, like you asked me to. Frankly, I've got my dimpled pub mug, and I'm going to stick to this one. We can also, I also, excuse me, I also have my no neck pint as well. These are the two glasses that I would expect 90% of these beers to show up in. The other 10%, probably whatever they have on hand. But this is what I'm. If I were a gambling man, I would put my money on these two glasses here. Temperature wise, because my rule of thumb is the darker the warmer, the stronger the warmer. Generally speaking, this one I would want to drink this, pull it out of the fridge and let it warm up a bit to 42 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit. If we're talking Celsius, I'm thinking like 5, 6, 7 degrees Celsius, because I want it to be cold, but a little bit warm. A little bit warm to express some of those volatiles. If this were true cask and quote unquote cellar temperature, it's not warm, flat beer. It's cool, slightly effervescent beer. So I would expect those to be anywhere from 45, maybe even up to 50 degrees, or 7 to 10 degrees Celsius. That's totally okay. You're going to get more flavor out of that. But just finding that sweet spot for your beer, the warmer it gets, the more the alcohol is going to come out too. So that's what I expect out of these beers, temperature and glass wise. But Julia, kick us into pairings. What would you pair with this?
This is a great style that will go, if you're in the country of origin, obviously with fish and chips, and that breading on the outside of some kind of white fish it will mimic and mirror and echo back to the pale malt notes. You've got a great chance to try this, not with too advanced cheeses, stinky cheeses you can try certainly, but aged cheddar would go very, very well with this. I see definite synergies there to help to have the cheddar, actually the richness of that cheddar, the fat, actually look at the bitterness of this beer and tell it to calm down a little. And then I see a chance for the malt to showcase more. We list on craftbeer.com ginger spice cake, which I think is a great option. And then one of my favorite pairings is American IPA and fettuccine Alfredo, dusted with a little bit of sage and maybe rosemary. And I absolutely would say, if you want to have some fun, do that with the classic American IPA and then have an English IPA next to it and give that a try. The other, and I could talk all day about why that pairing works, because you need beers with a little bit more alcohol. This is 5 to 7.5%, as we said. So it's a little more timid in the alcohol compared to American IPAs, but it will stand up to the richness of the fettuccine Alfredo. It'll, I think, help emphasize the umami of that fettuccine from the Parmesan cheese. The richness of the cream in fettuccine, I think, will really fall well into the malt flavors of the beer, and so forth. The last thing that comes to mind is marmalade. I want to have like cheesecake with orange marmalade, just like draped, drizzled all over it, and then try it with an English IPA and see what happens to the flavor of those hops. And hopefully those hops are emphasized more, like sometimes can emphasize, sometimes things can de-emphasize or calm something that's like it. But I would think that those hops will pop much more with some marmalade next to it.
Yeah, because there's enough bitterness in here that I couldn't have 2, 3, 4 of these at a go if I drink that much to begin with. But when you take that bitterness and those flavors that come out of a beer like this, you said it, that aged cheddar would be amazing. If I'm still in England, I want Scottish eggs. I want bangers and mash. I want some meat pies because of all that butter, that cream, the all that stuff. The bitterness and the flavors would just really mesh and just pull out these just a wonderful flavor experience. Otherwise, pasta, creamy pasta. I'm thinking beef stroganoff would be amazing with this as well. But you get the idea. This beer has a lot of impact. There's a lot of bitterness, a lot of malt to balance with. This is a fantastic food pairing beer. If you don't love IPAs inherently in and of themselves, then try them with food, and it'll completely change and be amazing.
Well said, friend. I love it. I'm thirsty and hungry, as always, at the end of this show. And just want to say thanks to everyone for listening to A Sense of Beer Style. And good beers, and cheers to you.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to A Sense of Beer Style, the essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. With advanced Cicerones, me, Julia,
And me, Jeremy.
Tune into the next episode as we continue exploring the world of beer styles and what to make of them. We encourage you to listen to the prepisodes to build your foundation and better understand beer styles.
And before the next episode, I'd like to ask you to review the show and let us know what you'd like featured in upcoming episodes. Until next time, here's to you and your sense of beer style. Thank you for listening. Cheers.